I want you to close your eyes for just a moment and take a deep breath. Try to recall the distinct, comforting smell of your childhood home on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Perhaps it is the rich, dark aroma of filter coffee brewing slowly in the kitchen, mixed with the faint, lingering scent of a heavy tobacco pipe. Can you hear the slow, steady ticking of the old wooden grandfather clock in the hallway, or the cheerful ringing of bicycle bells out on the wet cobblestone street? Welcome back to the Netherlands of the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. Today, we are going to embark on a beautiful, deeply nostalgic journey together. We are going to explore dozens of everyday habits and common rituals that were an absolute, unquestioned part of our daily lives back then. These are the things we did without a second thought, the simple realities of a generation that grew up with scraped knees and absolute freedom. Yet, if you tried to do any of these things today, you would face shocked stares, heavy fines, or even arrest. We will talk about how we traveled, how we raised our children, and how we celebrated life. And please, stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will share is perhaps the most touching reminder of a profound community trust that we have sadly lost forever. Before we dive into these forgotten rituals, let us remember what it actually felt like to live in that era. Time itself seemed to flow differently back then. It moved at a much slower, more forgiving pace, like a quiet canal winding through a sleeping city. We did not have endless notifications buzzing in our pockets, nor did we have the constant pressure to be available every single second of the day. If you wanted to speak to someone, you walked to their house and knocked on the heavy wooden door. We often hear modern voices claim that life without advanced technology was somehow smaller or less connected. But we know the absolute truth, do we not? Our lives were infinitely richer in genuine human emotion. Our connections were forged face to face, over a shared pot of tea and a tin plate of biscuits. We carried heavy silver guilders in our pockets, and we knew the names of our neighbors, our butchers, and our bakers. We lived in a society that relied heavily on mutual trust, common sense, and a shared understanding of community rules. It was a world that was undeniably rougher around the edges, entirely lacking in modern safety cushions, but it was incredibly warm, deeply sincere, and wonderfully authentic. And now, let us step back onto a typical Dutch train in the 1970s. The heavy yellow doors close with a solid, echoing thud, and as you walk down the narrow aisle, you are instantly greeted by a thick blue haze floating in the air. Smoking was not just a passing habit, it was an unquestioned right, deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. Every single armrest had a small metallic ashtray built right into it, usually overflowing with grey ash and discarded wooden matches. Men in tailored wool suits would calmly roll a cigarette from a leather pouch of heavy shag tobacco, the strong, earthy smell of drum or Van Nel mingling seamlessly with the scent of wet winter coats and damp umbrellas. Mothers would sit, reading their morning newspaper, a cigarette casually resting between their fingers, while young toddlers played happily at their feet on the patterned seats. You could even smoke freely in the hospital waiting rooms, nervously puffing away before seeing the doctor. The idea that secondhand smoke was dangerous simply did not exist in our daily vocabulary. It was a shared atmosphere, a communal cloud of relaxation that followed us everywhere we went. Today, lighting a match in any public space would cause an immediate uproar. But back then, it was just the comforting scent of everyday life unfolding naturally around you. Let us turn our memories to the cobblestone streets and the way we used to travel with our children. Picture a sturdy black grandmother bicycle, rattling cheerfully along the uneven brick roads of Amsterdam or Utrecht. Today, a child on a bicycle is strapped into an ergonomically designed, crash-tested plastic seat, wearing a brightly colored safety helmet. But in the 1970s, such things were entirely unheard of. A mother would cycle confidently through heavy traffic with a toddler perched casually on a tiny saddle attached right to the crossbar, gripping the middle of the handlebars. Another older child would be balancing on the rear luggage rack, legs dangling freely, holding onto their mother's heavy winter coat. There were no safety belts, no helmets, and often no lights when the evening fog rolled in. The heavy canvas grocery bags would be swinging from the handlebars, threatening to tip the balance with every sharp turn. We trusted our own balance and the unwritten rules of the busy Dutch streets. It was a beautiful, chaotic dance of metal and motion. If you attempted to transport your precious children this way today, the police would undoubtedly pull you over in shock. But to us, it was merely the morning school run, filled with cold wind on our cheeks. Do you remember the distinctive, cheerful sound of the milkman approaching your street early in the morning? Long before the massive, fluorescent supermarkets took over our towns, the local milkman brought the dairy directly to our front doors. He drove a small, slow-moving electric float, or in the even older days, a cart pulled by a sturdy horse. What is completely illegal and unthinkable today is how we actually received our milk. The milkman carried massive metal churns filled with fresh, raw, unpasteurized milk straight from the local farms. Mothers would walk out to the street holding their own ceramic jugs or glass pitchers, and the milkman would use a metal dipper to ladle the rich, creamy liquid directly into their containers. There were no expiration dates printed on plastic labels, no sterile processing plants, and certainly no pasteurization laws governing this beautiful morning ritual. We drank that rich milk with the thick layer of cream floating right on top, and it made us incredibly strong. Today, selling unpasteurized raw milk in such an open, unregulated manner is strictly forbidden due to modern health codes. But we will never forget the taste of that pure, sweet milk, or the friendly daily chats with the man who delivered it to us through rain and snow. And how could we ever forget the great summer migrations to France, Spain, or the rural campsites of the Veluwe? Packing the family car for a 3-week summer holiday was a monumental task that required military precision. If you had a large family and a spacious station wagon, the solution for seating the youngest children was simple, but utterly terrifying by today's strict standards. The parents would fold down the rear seats and create a giant, flat play area in the trunk of the car. We would throw in a few old mattresses, some thick sleeping bags, and a pile of comic books. As our fathers drove down the highways at high speeds, we children would be rolling around in the back, completely unrestrained, playing endless games of cards and looking out the rear window at the cars trailing behind us. The concept of wearing a seatbelt in the back of a car was entirely foreign. In fact, most older cars did not even have seatbelts installed in the rear. If the car had to brake suddenly, we simply slid forward into the back of our parents' seats. Today, putting a child in the trunk of a moving vehicle without a heavily regulated, size-appropriate safety harness is a serious criminal offense. Yet, those incredibly dangerous journeys are among our most treasured, joyful childhood memories. Let us take a quiet walk down to the local corner store, the traditional cigar shop that smelled of rich cedar wood, old paper, and sweet tobacco. When you were just 8 or 10 years old, your father might hand you a crumpled 10-guilder note and a small, handwritten piece of paper. Your very important mission was to walk alone to the store and purchase a box of heavy cigars or a packet of Caballero cigarettes for him. The shopkeeper, a friendly older man wearing a brown apron, knew exactly who you were and who your parents were. He would take the note, hand you the tobacco products without a single question, give you your change, and perhaps even offer you a piece of licorice for the journey home. There were absolutely no age verification checks, no warning labels about fatal diseases, and no laws preventing a small child from purchasing heavy tobacco. It was simply a neighborly transaction, a small chore that made you feel incredibly grown up and deeply trusted by your family. If a 10-year-old child walked into a modern convenience store today and asked to buy a pack of cigarettes, the authorities would be called immediately and the shop would lose its license. But back in our day, it was just another ordinary Saturday morning errand. Now, let us talk about the rather extraordinary ways our parents used to care for our minor ailments long before modern medicine became so incredibly strict and heavily regulated. When a young baby was crying endlessly due to painful teething, our grandmothers had a very traditional, highly effective, and deeply illegal remedy. They would take a small white sugar cube, delicately pour a single drop of strong, authentic Dutch Geneva or brandy onto it, and let the infant suck on the sweet, alcoholic treat. Within minutes, the screaming would stop and the baby would fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. If an older child had a terrible cough or a bad winter cold, a warm glass of milk mixed with anise and a generous splash of strong spirits was considered the absolute best medicine. Alcohol was viewed not as a dangerous substance for minors, but as a practical, natural anesthetic that was readily available in every household cabinet. The sheer thought of deliberately giving hard liquor to a teething infant today would result in an immediate visit from Child Protection Services. Yet, we all survived those traditional remedies, and we look back at those pragmatic, old-fashioned healing methods with a warm, knowing smile, remembering the sweet taste of anise and sugar. Picture a crisp, dry Saturday afternoon in late autumn. The leaves have fallen from the trees and the gardens are desperately in need of clearing. In the 1970s, the solution for getting rid of garden waste and household trash was incredibly straightforward, yet deeply harmful to the environment. Almost every father had a large, rusty metal oil drum sitting in the corner of the backyard. We would gather all the fallen leaves, old newspapers, broken wooden crates, and even pieces of hard plastic, throw them all into the barrel, and set the entire pile on fire. Thick, acrid plumes of grey smoke would rise high above the wooden fences, drifting lazily through the neighbourhood and settling into everyone's freshly washed laundry hanging on the lines. Nobody ever complained, and nobody ever called the Environmental Protection Agency, because burning your trash in the garden was simply what everyone did on a Saturday. We would stand around the roaring fire, mesmerized by the flames, warming our cold hands. Today, open burning of waste is strictly prohibited in residential areas due to toxic emissions and severe fire hazards. But back then, the smell of burning leaves and melting plastic was just the unmistakable aroma of a productive autumn weekend. Let us turn our minds to the arrival of spring, particularly in the vast green northern provinces like Friesland. Do you remember the intense excitement of the early spring meadows, the damp earth clinging to your rubber boots as you searched for the very first plover's egg? The ancient tradition of collecting these speckled eggs was a deeply rooted cultural ritual, signaling the true, joyful end of the long, dark winter. Men and children would walk for hours through the cold, wet grass, their eyes glued to the ground, searching for those perfectly camouflaged little treasures hidden in the mud. Finding the very first egg of the season was a matter of immense national pride, and the lucky finder would even have the grand honor of presenting it directly to Queen Juliana herself. We would take the rest of the eggs home, boil them gently, and eat them with a simple sprinkle of salt. Today, due to strict and absolutely necessary environmental protection laws, touching, moving, or taking a wild bird's egg is a serious criminal offense. The open meadows are now carefully guarded wildlife sanctuaries. While we completely understand the need to protect nature, a small, romantic part of our rural soul was lost when this beloved springtime ritual was entirely banned. Now, let us gently open the heavy wooden doors of a traditional brown cafe on a late Friday evening. The air is thick with smoke, laughter, and the clinking of small glass Geneva glasses hitting the wooden bar. In the decades before strict public safety campaigns and modern breathalyzers, the attitude toward drinking alcohol and driving a vehicle was shockingly relaxed. A man could easily consume 5 or 6 heavy beers, perhaps accompanied by a few shots of strong liquor, jingle his car keys in his pocket, and bid the bartender a cheerful good night. He would then climb into his car and navigate the dark, winding country roads home. The local police officers often knew everyone in town, and if a driver was swerving slightly, the officer might simply escort him home and tell him to sleep it off. The social stigma attached to drinking and driving simply did not exist in the way it fiercely does today. We did not have designated drivers, and we certainly did not have zero-tolerance policies. It is a sheer miracle that we survived those reckless nights. Today, such behavior would rightly lead to a revoked license and a jail sentence, but in those days, it was an accepted, unspoken part of the weekend culture that nobody ever dared to question. Do you remember the incredible thrill of travelling on the old, heavy green and yellow passenger trains operated by the National Railways? Those magnificent steel beasts possessed a feature that provided endless entertainment for children, but would cause an absolute panic among modern safety inspectors. The large glass windows in the seating compartments could be pulled all the way down using a thick, worn leather strap. As soon as the train left the station and picked up speed, we would immediately lower the window and stick our heads, and sometimes half of our upper bodies, completely outside. The roaring wind would whip fiercely through our hair, making our eyes water, while the deafening sound of the metal wheels on the tracks filled our ears. If a train passed by on the opposite track, you could feel the violent rush of air pulling at your clothes. Sometimes, you would even get a tiny, sharp piece of black soot right in your eye. There were no warning stickers, no protective bars, and no automatic locking mechanisms to keep us safely inside. We were entirely trusted to use our own common sense and not fall out. Today, train windows are permanently sealed shut in air-conditioned carriages, keeping us perfectly safe but completely disconnected from the rushing world outside. Let us revisit the incredible freedom of being a teenager with absolutely no money but a burning desire to see the world. If you wanted to travel from Amsterdam to Paris, or even just to the next large town, you simply walked to the edge of the highway entrance, held out your thumb, and waited. Hitchhiking was an incredibly popular, completely normal way to travel. You would write your destination on a piece of torn cardboard with a thick black marker, and within 20 minutes, a complete stranger would pull over and offer you a ride. We would climb into the passenger seats of traveling salesmen, truck drivers, or families on holiday, sharing stories and sandwiches for hundreds of kilometers. Our parents never worried. They simply told us to be home by Sunday evening. The level of implicit trust we placed in absolutely unknown people is something that is almost impossible to explain to the younger generations today. While hitchhiking is not strictly illegal everywhere, it has completely vanished from our modern culture due to an overwhelming, pervasive fear of stranger danger. Today, letting your teenage daughter get into a random car on the highway would be considered negligent parenting, but to us, it was the ultimate, beautiful adventure. And now, we must talk about the culinary traditions that would give modern food safety inspectors severe nightmares. Particularly in the more rural farming communities, the tradition of home slaughter was a major community event. When winter approached, a local butcher or a skilled farmer would slaughter a large pig right in the barn or the backyard. The entire neighborhood would gather to watch, help, and eventually share the meat. What is completely illegal and highly dangerous by today's standards is that we would often eat pieces of the freshly minced raw pork right there on the spot, seasoned with just a little salt and white pepper, long before any official health inspector had ever seen it. Even in the cities, buying deeply red, entirely raw, minced meat products from the local butcher and eating them on a soft white bun was a beloved delicacy. There were no strict temperature controls, no laboratory testing for bacteria, and no expiration labels. We trusted the butcher completely, and we trusted our own strong stomachs. Today, the stringent regulations surrounding the processing, testing, and consumption of raw meat make those old, unregulated neighborhood feasts completely impossible, preserving our health but erasing a vivid, communal tradition. Let us take a stroll down the sidewalks of our old neighborhoods, a journey that required a very specific type of careful navigation. In the 1970s and 80s, pet ownership was wonderfully simple and entirely unregulated. Dogs were simply let out the front door in the morning to roam the streets, completely off their leashes. They formed little packs, chased the postman, barked at passing cars, and lived completely free lives within the neighborhood. However, this freedom came with a very messy consequence. The sidewalks were an absolute minefield of dog waste. The concept of carrying a small plastic bag to carefully pick up after your dog was entirely unknown and would have been considered utterly laughable. You simply had to watch your step very carefully, and mothers were constantly scrubbing the soles of our shoes with an old brush before letting us into the house. Today, allowing your dog to roam freely without a leash is strictly prohibited in urban areas, and failing to clean up after them will result in heavy municipal fines. The streets are undoubtedly much cleaner and safer now, but we do somewhat miss those fiercely independent, slightly wild neighborhood dogs who knew everyone on the street. Do you recall the endless summer afternoons spent crouching beside the muddy edges of the local ditches and shallow canals? Armed with nothing but a cheap green mesh net on a bamboo pole, we were entirely dedicated amateur biologists. We would spend hours catching tiny sticklebacks, green frogs, water beetles, and slippery salamanders. We would transfer our precious catches into empty, heavily washed glass peanut butter jars filled with cloudy canal water and proudly carry them home to display on our bedroom windowsills. Sadly, without proper oxygen or food, most of these fragile creatures would perish within a few days. At the time, we were just curious children, connecting with nature in a very hands-on, albeit slightly cruel manner. Today, the strict environmental and animal welfare laws in the Netherlands fiercely protect native amphibians and fish. Catching, transporting, and confining wild frogs or salamanders in glass jars is now completely illegal. Children are taught to observe nature from a safe distance, leaving the wildlife entirely undisturbed. It is absolutely the right thing to do for the environment, but we cherish the memories of those muddy knees and the thrill of the hunt. As the year drew to a close, the anticipation for New Year's Eve reached a fever pitch, but the way we celebrated with fireworks in the 1970s and 80s was absolute unregulated chaos. Weeks before the holiday, children would legally purchase heavy, incredibly loud firecrackers. The most notorious were the ones you ignited not by lighting a fuse, but by striking them roughly against a matchbox. We would hold these highly explosive devices in our bare hands, strike them, and wait until the very last possible second before throwing them into the air, or mischievously, into a metal trash can. There were absolutely no safety glasses, no fireproof coats, and certainly no designated municipal firing zones. We blew up innocent mailboxes, destroyed traffic signs, and filled the freezing night air with thick grey gunpowder smoke. It was a chaotic, dangerous, but incredibly thrilling freedom. Today, the sale and use of such heavy, explosive consumer fireworks are strictly banned across the entire country due to the severe injuries they caused. The streets are much quieter now on New Year's Eve, but those of us who lived through the Wild West of the 70s still remember the deafening, glorious roar of the midnight hour. Let us look up at the tall brick buildings being constructed in our rapidly growing towns. If you observed the brave men working on those construction sites in the 1960s and 70s, you would witness a scene that defies all modern logic. Construction workers would effortlessly balance on narrow, unpainted wooden planks 3 or 4 stories high, with absolutely no safety harnesses, no hard hats, and no safety nets below. And the most astonishing detail of all, many of them were wearing traditional wooden clogs while climbing the steep, rickety ladders. It was believed that the heavy wood protected their toes from falling bricks far better than soft leather boots. During their lunch breaks, it was completely normal for these men to sit on the edge of the scaffolding and drink a few cold bottles of beer before returning to the dangerous heights. The strict occupational health and safety regulations that exist today, with their fluorescent vests, mandatory steel-toed boots, and rigorous alcohol testing, simply did not exist. It was a time when manual labor relied entirely on raw nerve, perfect balance, and a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the deadly risks involved in building our modern cities. When the rare, beautiful Dutch summer finally arrived, we flocked by the thousands to the sandy beaches of Zandvoort and Scheveningen, but our approach to sunbathing was absolutely terrifying by modern dermatological standards. The concept of sun protection factor, or SPF, was completely foreign to us. Instead of protecting our skin from the burning ultraviolet rays, we actively tried to accelerate the process. Women and teenagers would proudly slather their entire bodies in pure baby oil, or sometimes even cheap olive oil from the kitchen pantry. We would lie on reflective aluminum foil mats to bounce the harsh rays directly onto our faces, desperately trying to achieve that deep, dark, fashionable tan. We would bake in the intense midday sun for hours until our skin turned bright, painful red. Peeling shoulders was simply considered a normal, expected part of a successful beach holiday. Today, public health campaigns relentlessly warn us about the severe dangers of sun exposure, and applying heavy sunscreen is mandatory. Looking back at our oily, sunburned younger selves, we can hardly believe the tremendous damage we willingly inflicted upon ourselves, completely unaware of the long-term consequences. Now, let us walk quietly down the polished linoleum hallways of a primary school in the 1960s. The classroom was a place of absolute, unquestioned authority, ruled by the schoolmaster in his formal suit. If a child misbehaved, talked out of turn, or had remarkably sloppy handwriting, the punishment was swift, physical, and entirely legal. The teacher would demand that you hold out your hand, and he would deliver a sharp, stinging smack across your knuckles with a heavy, flat wooden ruler. It was called handing out a tick, and it was a universally accepted method of maintaining strict classroom discipline. The most shocking part to modern sensibilities is that if you went home crying and told your parents what had happened, they would almost certainly side with the teacher, and perhaps even punish you a second time for misbehaving in the first place. Today, corporal punishment in schools is absolutely illegal, recognized as deeply harmful and abusive. Children are taught with empathy, discussion, and positive reinforcement. But for our generation, the sharp sting of the wooden ruler was just an ordinary hazard of growing up, teaching us a very harsh lesson in absolute obedience. Picture a typical Sunday morning in the quiet suburbs, where proud fathers were busy maintaining their beloved family cars in the driveway. Changing the motor oil at home was a common weekend chore that saved a few guilders. However, what happened to the thick, toxic black sludge once it was drained from the engine is truly shocking today. Without a single thought for environmental pollution, many men would simply carry the heavy drain pan to the edge of the street and pour gallons of used motor oil directly down the municipal storm drains, or even dump it straight into the sandy soil behind the garden shed. To clean the heavy black grease from their hands, they would vigorously scrub their skin with pure, harsh gasoline from a rag. The awareness of soil contamination, groundwater protection, and chemical toxicity was virtually non-existent in the average household. Today, dumping toxic chemicals into the earth or the sewer system is a severe environmental crime, carrying massive fines, and hazardous waste must be taken to specialized municipal recycling centers. We simply did not know any better back then. The earth seemed infinitely large and perfectly capable of swallowing all our mistakes. Finally, we come to a memory that beautifully illustrates the profound, almost magical sense of community trust that defined our generation. Imagine a bustling shopping street filled with local bakeries, butchers, and greengrocers. A young mother, pushing a heavy, beautifully sprung vintage pram, needs to step inside the crowded bakery to buy a loaf of fresh bread. Because the shop is small and crowded, she simply parks the pram right on the busy sidewalk, leaves her sleeping infant alone outside in the cold, fresh air, and walks into the store. She might stay inside, chatting with the baker and the neighbors, for 20 minutes. Dozens of strangers would walk past the sleeping baby, perhaps stopping to admire the child, but nobody would ever dream of harming them. The thought of kidnapping or malicious intent simply did not cross a mother's mind. The entire street was an extended family, and everyone silently watched over each other. If a mother left a baby unattended on a modern city street today, the police would be called immediately and she would likely face child endangerment charges. This lost habit is the one that breaks my heart the most, because it proves just how profoundly the fabric of our trust has unraveled. As we look back at these 20 remarkable habits, it becomes clear that we do not merely miss the old, dangerous fireworks, the thick smoke on the trains, or the taste of raw milk. What we are truly grieving for is our own vibrant youth and that incredible, irreplaceable feeling of absolute freedom and deep community trust. We survived a world without helmets, without warning labels, and without constant supervision, because we relied entirely on common sense and the watchful eyes of our neighbors. The world has undeniably become a much safer, cleaner, and healthier place for our grandchildren, and for that, we must be truly grateful. But a small, beautiful part of our collective soul was left behind in those smoky cafes and those unsupervised playgrounds. Thank you so very much for taking this warm, nostalgic stroll down memory lane with me today. If these stories brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, please give this video a gentle like and subscribe to our channel for more beautiful journeys into the past. And now, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Which of these forgotten habits do you remember the most vividly? And what is a memory from your childhood that modern generations simply wouldn't understand? Please write your stories in the comments below, as I cannot wait to read them.